Hey YouTubes, how's it going? So we're going to try something a little different today. Still keep this video kind of short, maybe about 15 minutes or so. I'm editing some videos that I have of me tearing down the Breakout, the 2015 Harley Breakout, so I can put 110 kit in it this winter. And it ended up being like an hour and a half long for the second part of the video. So I was chatting with Nick over by the channel Get This Nick. He is the owner of my previous bike, Lucy. And I was saying, hey, what would you do? Asking for some advice. And he thought about maybe doing a commentary over the video, which I've never done before. So we're going to give that a try and to see how it goes. My editing software, turns out I can do a voiceover. So as you probably have been watching, I have a Arlen-ness 90-degree monster sucker intake, which I'm pretty fond of those intakes. They allow a lot of air into the motor. So I'm just using a hex driver and removing that. It's kind of a pain in the butt. A lot of screws to it. So that's really what I'm doing right now. And I just took the screws out that go into the manifold, and now I'm removing the bolts that go into the heads, which allow the crankcase to breathe. They breathe through these little channels inside of the air intake, and it goes back into the manifold. Here we've already moved that, so the air breather is now gone, and the lower rocker box cover is still attached to the heads. So there are 6 bolts, I believe they're a 1/2 inch bolt, that hold this down onto the head. So I'm just kind of working my way through that. Apparently I've already done the front one, so we're on the rear cylinder. And while I was talking with Nick, he was like, not everybody knows what you know, Dave. So, why don't you kind of explain what's going on? So I'm like, yeah, really not a bad idea. What's common for me to go through on a motorcycle really isn't for everybody. So yeah, I just got done removing that lower rocker box. And what I like to do is make everything really organized on a table as I'm taking things apart. Keep all the screws together, all the bolts together, all the parts together. It makes life a lot easier. Now on the Breakout, the ignition is attached where normally a horn is on most bikes. So, and it's got a very high torque value, so I'm using my socket wrench with a breaker bar that I have and breaking that loose and taking the plugs off the ignition and the coil. They're kind of all together. The ignition and the coil are together on those. So that's a really easy process. You just kind of unplug it. This is the tricky part, and you'll notice right there I showed a hex key. That's a 1/4 inch hex key, and to get the back bolts of the manifold, you have to take this hex key and chop it in half. There is no way you're getting any room within that tight space for a full-size hex key. So you chop it in half, and so you have about a 1/2 key left, and that gives you just enough to get it inside those hex bolts and maneuver it through. And this is a long process. I spent probably 15 minutes on each side trying to get those unbolted. It's like a 1/8 of a turn at a time. And then the front part of the manifold, you just take an extended reach hex. Similar, it's still a 1/4 inch, but it's the long driver of it. And once you get all the rocker boxes off, you can maneuver through this pretty quickly. If you don't, you're not going to get clearance to go at an angle like this, and you're going to have to use that really small hex key. And good luck with that. There's just not enough space. You're running into wires and the manifold itself. So really, to take off the manifold, you really need to take off the rocker box and the covers. It can be done without it, but it's not pleasant. You'll spend a good hour and a half trying to get that stupid thing out of there. So yeah, I'm just going through, and I removed those bolts, and now I'm removing the manifold and quickly realizing how much gas there was from the intake coming off the fuel tank. The fuel tank connects with a hose into the back of the manifold, and that drives your brain fart here. And it's part of the bad thing about doing these voiceovers, your fuel injectors. So there was quite a bit of gas in there. Yeah, this is going a little quick. I guess I'm talking a little more than I actually edited the video on. So right now I'm trying to break the heads. So the bolts, these are torqued on quite a bit too. These are the bolts that also hold down the cylinders. So I think these have a torque value of like 42 pounds by the time you're done. Noteworthy that these are a 12-point socket. I rarely use 12 points. I prefer the 6-point sockets, but these are a 12 points, so make sure you have a 1/2 inch 12 point. So I'm just breaking them loose right now with the breaker bar. Like I said, they're on there really tight, so if I don't use the breaker bar, it's very difficult. I don't have enough leverage. But the neat thing about these and the way it connects down to the head bolts, or the head studs, is that once you break it loose, they don't have any Loctite on them. You don't use Loctite with these bolts, and you can just remove them by your hand, and they're very, very easy to do. So once you break it free, it's just a matter of just unscrewing it with your hands. It's really nothing. So I just did the left side of the bike, and now I'm working on the right side. When you're removing them, there's not really a pattern to them like there is when you install them. When you install them, you have to have a certain pattern. I think it's the outside of the engine to the inside on the left and right side of the bike. And you have to go in increments of like 10 pounds on your torque value. But remove them and there's not one. You just remove the bolts, and here you'll see that the head is stuck to the cylinder. Just over time, that gasket, by default, Harley uses like a paper style gasket, and it gets seized up and kind of melted together and pain in the butt. When you replace them, you'll end up upgrading them to a triple style gasket that's metal, and they're kind of pleated together. It's a really nice gasket. But I was starting to maybe work with the cylinders, and I realized, oh, my tappets or lifters are still in the block. So from the last video, I never removed them. So I'm removing these magnets that I use to hold the lifters up when I'm pulling the cam chest apart. Otherwise they'll fall down and they could hurt the cam, either the cams or the camshaft, because they're a hard material. I'm just removing these lifter blocks that hold the pushrod tubes. There's an excessive amount of blue Loctite on these from the factory, so it's every turn you're like trying to struggle. But it's just the way it is. I guess they don't want them coming out. So I'm working my way through the front and rear lifter blocks. Just kind of unscrewing them. Not much to talk about with this part. I probably could have edited this down a little bit, but it's almost over, so bear with it. I'm just unscrewing these blocks. I found that they were on there pretty good. Again, there's that paper style gasket, and it heats up and cools down, heats up and cools down, and it kind of molds to the motor. So those will get changed out with the metal one as well. So I'm keeping all the the screws and bolts together. That way, like I said, they're organized. I know where everything's at. I'm using a rubber mallet. You never want to use a regular mallet because you'll end up denting things, and or even a regular hammer and putting dings and stuff. Always use a rubber one. I had to hit these pretty hard to break them loose, but they finally popped off. No harm, no foul. I'm putting them on my table of collections. If you notice here, I don't know if I can pause this or not. No, I'm unable to pause this on voiceover. Apparently I did the the rear cylinder and didn't realize it until, and I wasn't GoProing. It's like, oh crap. So I made sure to make sure the GoPro was on this time. So I'm removing the rear cylinder. This is an important process. I'm going to end up using these cylinders and pistons in the 96-inch motor and swap them over because these are a 103. So what I'm doing is I'm raising the cylinder around the piston just enough to expose this pin, a pin that holds into the cylinder. I can't remember what it's called, a piston clip. It's not a piston clip, but it's a, I don't know, at the top of my head. I can't seem to pause the video, my voiceover, to look it up. But inside of the piston, where it meets and holds onto the crank, there's a pin that slides in, and it holds everything together. And there's what's called a piston clip. It's a retainer ring that I'm trying to get out that holds that clip in. If you're following along, if not, sorry. I don't know how else to explain it. I'm not a mechanic. But you definitely want to put some paper towel in underneath of it, because this little tiny clip, what you see right there, is very small. If it drops down into the motor, and if you can't fish it out with a magnet, you're going to have to take the whole lower end apart just to get that one thing out. And you're talking about many hours of work. Yeah, right now you'll see me, I'm trying to get that little retainer out through the crank out of the piston so I can release the piston and the cylinder out. I realized that it was getting stuck on the unit, on the walls, so I had to maneuver things around, and you can hear I finally got it out. So there's, well, I'll show you a better picture of it in a minute. And right now I'm pushing the piston back up so I can lift everything out. I want to keep the piston in. There's that piece I was telling you about that holds everything together. You need to keep, if I'm going to reuse this cylinder and piston, I want to keep everything together. That way the rings don't come out, the piston rings, and lose the track that they were in. It's very important, so I don't have to rescore the inside of the cylinder or do anything else. Here I'm kind of showing you how I've got everything laid out. I've got them separated by the front of the motor and the rear of the motor, all the parts. Right now I'm protecting the case. The case is made of aluminum, but these cranks that I'm just putting like a hot water hose protectant, it's like a foam material around them. If those hit the edge of the motor at any type of force, you'll ding the motor because it's just aluminum, and these are hard anodized steel of the crank itself. So you want to make sure that you put some kind of foam or something around it to protect the motor, the block. Right now I'm just kind of cleaning things up. I'm basically done now. I just condensed about an hour and a half worth of work down to 14 minutes. So this is just a brief overview of me doing what I do and tearing the motor down to prep it for the parts I'm going to buy. So that's about it. I'm going to get ready for my ending statement. Well, if you stuck around this long, you've watched me tear down the motor, and hopefully some of you at least appreciated the art in doing this. It's not for everybody, but I enjoy working with the motor and all the components and building something basic and from scratch, and then writing it and knowing that I did that. It's just a thrill to me, and I'm glad I'm able to share it with you guys. So next up is Black Friday. I'll be ordering my parts from Fuel Moto. 110 kit, 58 millimeter throttle body, woods cams, cam chest. Yeah, blah blah blah. So this is my first time doing a voiceover. I probably didn't edit it correctly with how much I wanted to talk. So, thanks for watching anyway. Bye.